Hi, thank you so much for this very kind invitation to talk to you. Thanks for coming, sticking around on a Friday evening right before the sing-off. I know it's kind of a drag. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. Funding, as I tell my faculty, is a means to an end. It's really the wind beneath your wings. It's obviously not the end goal. So I'm not going to talk about numbers. It's all about the research that you do, the technology that you come up with, so the number of patients that you take care of, or the new innovative platforms you come up with. That's the most important thing. But at the end of the day, you need a few dollars to make that happen. And of course, I can't claim to know all about funding. I know a very little part of the process. So I'm going to try to share a little bit of that in the next few minutes. So I need to keep this up for...
All right, time up. Move on.
Sorry? Yeah, a few more minutes to not minutes, right? Seconds.
Okay.
All right. So there are various sources of funding that are available here in the United States: federal sources, state sources, corporate, clinical societies, including SAGEs, foundations, endowments, and gifts. So again, I'm going to focus on a few things, particularly on federal grants, for various reasons, which I'm not going to go into. But one of the reasons I'm going to do that is because I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that we have initiated a new task force called Alternative Funding Solutions Task Force, and the goal is to create new revenue sources. But I look at that as more the channeling the tremendous brain trust that we have in the society, right? You're doing a lot of new stuff, right? And that is sort of bubbling up through the society, but can we also take them to federal funding agencies and be able to monetize them and actually make them translate to the marketplace, not just to industry funding, but also to these major federal funding sources. So one of the early successes was R13, which is a consensus conference grant that was that initiated the Safe COLI Consensus Conference in 2018. I'd like to point out that there are, of course, many different funding agencies, and there's really no limit to the number of agencies that you can go through and sort of try to market your research. But the three major agencies are the RQ, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, the National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Defense. I'm going to focus on the RQ and the NIH. So, sometimes you might wonder what's the difference because they sound similar. But nothing could be more different between the two in terms of their focus and their size. First of all, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the budget per year in terms of a number of billions of dollars, RQ is about 100 times smaller. And the other thing you notice that while NIH's funding is going up, RQ funding is going down. And there is, for the last few years, there's been a discussion of them being folded into NIH and sort of being eliminated. But anyways, the point of this is that RQ research focuses healthcare quality and patient safety, which is very much along the lines of the things that you do here. And on the other hand, NIH is much broader and bigger. There are 27 institutes or centers at NIH. And this is about the spectrum of research spanning from a fundamental knowledge to, of living systems and the application of the knowledge to enhance health, length of life, and reduce illness and disability. And there is some misconception that NIH does not fund the kinds of research that surgeons do, and that's absolutely not true. NIH is actually looking for more surgeons to participate in the research that they fund. So there are various kinds of research that is funded by these organizations, and at the early stages, the KSeries grants, I think, are most suitable for junior researchers as well as mid-career scientists. So there is a whole bunch of these KSeries grants which are more science-based, and some of them are based on more clinical focused research, and there are many, many of them. So I'd encourage you to go to the website and check them out as to how they suit your own research. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're looking for large-scale research, there are the things called the PSeries grants. And I'm not going to be focusing on those because they come after many, many years of focused research in certain areas. You want to go for a large grant of $1.5 million a year for 5 years or so. What I'm going to really focus on is the RSeries grants. And these are the really workhorse of the NIH. And there are three categories. And it's very important to understand the differences between the categories. There are the R03 grants, which are small grants of the order of about $50,000 direct cost per year for 2 years. Single PI success rate is reasonably high, about 21%. R21 are exploratory grants, so neither the R03 nor the R21 is geared toward establishing a research career. That's the key thing to remember. So they're to sort of initiate some ideas that you have, right? They would require substantial preliminary data. So even though R21s are not required to have preliminary data, there's strong evidence that preliminary data does correlate with success in R21s as well, except for a special type of R21 grants known as the Trailblazer R21s, which are 3-year grants. So it's very important to remember the difference between the grants, because if you actually do submit preliminary data for the Trailblazers, those grants will be taken out and administratively removed, irrespective of the scores that they receive. The success rate for the R21s are again, reasonable, about 16%. And they're, again, exploratory, so you're working on something, you want to figure out whether they work or not. Now, once you figure that out, then you go for the R01s, which are the major research grants that the NIH has, a maximum of $500,000, the direct cost per year. You do not have to submit a detailed budget if it's below $250,000 a year. Success rate varies from one center to the other, about 18 to 20%, sometimes a little lower, sometimes a little higher. Now, there's another class of grants, for example, that if you're working with companies or if you have your own company, then you can ask NIH for money. And that's one of the good things that they do to start and sort of maintain the small business defined by 500 or less employees. So the SBIR and SBIRSTTR have slightly different flavors. You can go ahead and check them out. But basically, one requires the PI to be from the small business, for example, SBIR. SBIRSTTR, it can be from either one of the institute, from the university or from the company. So one of the ideas that we have, for example, in the Alternative Funding Solutions Committee, is the task force, is to not only have some of the research grants go through, but also some of these partnerships, like the SBIRs and SBIRSTTRs, that could involve SAGES as a subcontractor or go through SAGES. So essentially, I have myself incorporated SAGES, as, for example, as one of my subcontractors in an SBIR grant. And the thing to note here is that their success rates are actually much, much higher than the RSeries grant. So it's actually a good idea to do that, and they do allow you to do a significant amount of research in that. In terms of due dates, NIH believes in this, ongoing submissions, and they have 3 due dates a year. So though many of us initially, when we started our research, always depended upon this specific calls. And that's one of the things I would ask you not to do, because NIH really doesn't believe in these special solicitations. I mean, they do put them out, but these are more for PR than anything else. So they have the things called unsolicited R01s or R21s, or the parent grants, and they have certain expiration dates. So you can have anything that you're really working on that falls within the purview of NIH research, which is health-related research, literally anything, right? That's your research. NIH and RQ believe in grassroots level research boiling up. They do not have their own agenda, except in a few cases, like the Brain Initiative, Alzheimer's, and so on, where they have specific funding. But for everything else, it has to come from you, right? And best idea is actually to go for the unsolicited R21 or R01 parent grants. So we had a think tank meeting with NIH program managers, and they were discussing about this new PA that has come up for medical simulators for practicing patient care. And there are 2 major institutes that are participating in that. And this actually falls squarely in what we do here in SAGES, right? One is NIDDK is looking at skill acquisition and outcomes assessment for practicing surgeons. And NIBIB, which is more engineering focused, is looking at technology development, particularly virtual reality-based technology for surgical coaching of practicing surgeons. One thing to remember is that clinical trials are not allowed here. So as of, I think, 2 years ago, NIH started distinguishing the grants as clinical trials allowed and clinical trials not allowed. So if you have clinical trials As part of your grant, there are other mechanisms that you can go through. You have to look out for whether the particular mechanism you're going for does allow or not clinical trials. So the scoring of the grant, there's an overall impact score, right? And the impact score is the one that sort of gets you funded or not. But there are 5 major scored criteria depending upon the significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. So it's, each category gets ratings and correspondingly, pros and cons, but there's an overall impact score that is given for each award, for each proposal. R01s are 1 page of specific aims, so actually not a lot of write-up. So for $500,000 a year for 5 years, that's quite limited in terms of 1 page of specific aims, 12 pages of details. R21s are even shorter, 1 page of specific aims and 6 pages of write-up. But remember, the shorter does not mean easier to get. It just means you have a much more focused program that one has to write. And what one is judged on is literally the compactness and the tightness of the research plan. Then, of course, there are all these other things that need to be taken care of, like budget justification, subcontract paperwork, biosketches, and they're quite finicky about the biosketch format. You can actually download those. Production of human subjects, vertebrate animals, administrative pages. So it's a good idea to, if you're planning to write for the first time, to actually do it at least 2 months in advance, to start the process at least 2 months in advance, work with either your institute or the SAGES. For example, if you are planning to submit a grant to SAGES, just let us know, and we'll work with you to help you with all the paperwork, as well as part of the write-up, because we have a grant writer associated with the task force. Now, unlike NSF or other funding agencies, the institutes are not related to grant review. So there's a separate review process. There's a separate organization called Center for Scientific Review that takes on itself the task of reviewing the grants, and each of the grants is assigned to a study section, right? And they're reviewed, and after the study section meets, then you get your scores and the summary statements. One has to realize that because the program managers of the institutes are not involved in the evaluation process, choice of the study section is critical. And it's quite confusing, literally speaking, because if you go to the website, there are hundreds of study sections. I think there are 140 or so study sections. The 2 study sections that are the standing study sections that are related to surgery are the BTSS, Bioengineering, Technology, and Surgical Sciences, and Surgery and Trauma. Now, there's a tool in which you can actually cut and paste to specific aims, and depending upon the keywords, they will tell you which study section best suits your project. So it doesn't have to be these 2. But I think it's a critical thing that one has to sort of get on board before submitting the project. Now, I was talking about the scoring. So once you get scored, so everybody scores your grant on the study section, right? And the average of that is computed. So that's between 1 and 9, 1 being the perfect score and 9 being the worst. More is not good in this case. Once you average it out, and then it's multiplied by 10 to give you a score between 10 and 90, right? And that score relates in a nonlinear fashion to the priority score. And the priority score, so this is a percentile score that you get out of the review process that maps to a priority score. And if the priority score is below the published pay line of an institute, you get funded. So it's a very, very objective process, in my opinion. It's one of the most objective processes I've seen that federal funding agencies have. And most institutes would have published these pay lines. So for beginners, I think the most important thing is not to worry about the grantsmanship, but to actually come up with a very, very exciting project that you're really excited about and you want to talk about. And before answering, before writing the grant, one should answer the question of the clinical impact. Why would others care? I love my project because I care about it, right? But why would others care? That's the key thing and for engineers, it's not engineering, oh, I have a great technology, now I can go and apply it. It should be the other way around, because review panels actually are fixated on that. They always discuss whether it's a technology for looking out for an application or the vice versa. If it's the former, it's the surest way to get your impact and percentile score beyond 50. Scientific premise is a very important factor, which is the strength of the published data. What is your grant based upon? The published data, it has to be very clearly delineated because that's the review perspective. Scientific rigor is another one. So is your study design based upon robust scientific methods and so that can guarantee reproducible results? For example, do you have strong statistical methods? Are you basing that on power analysis? Are you randomizing? Is it blinded? And so on and so forth. Sex as a biological variable, again, absolutely has to be addressed in every NIH proposal. If it is not, it will come back, right? Identify the right study section. Write a very exciting proposal. If you're not excited, don't expect others to be excited about it. And do not ever get discouraged if you don't get it the first time, right? We do not even look back at what's happening to the things in the past, except they're in the funding range. Resubmit with more data and better writing, and realize it's easier than you think. You can submit one more time with the revisions. That's called A1. If you still do not get funded, don't get discouraged. You can submit it all over again. So you can go on resubmitting the grant an infinite number of times, literally, until you get funded. So what's next in the landscape? It's very, very uncertain. So this fiscal year, we had a windfall of $2 billion additional funding for the NIH, particularly because of the Bipartisan Budget Act. We do not know whether the FY 2011 sequestration is going to be back, and we might get hit unless Congress acts. We have no control on that, so we've got to be prepared for at least a 10% across the board funding reduction in FY 20. So I didn't mean to end with that note, but apparently we are heading towards FY 20, at the breathtaking pace, and I think it's important for us to realize that we have to work under constraints. I mean, you work in constrained spaces as surgeons. I work in constraints of design. So basically, this is the constraint that's looking right at us, and we need to be careful about that as well. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and we can take questions later.